Hey all, here are OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a quick look at the soundcore by Anker C40i. These are open clip-on style buds, and for those following the headphone space will recognize that a couple months back, Bose launched their ultra open, debuting a new style for wearables almost that blends the boundaries between something like a pair of earrings as well as headphones, slightly more lightweight compared to most other designs, which conventionally needed to have a larger hook to be attached on, such as the Sport Open, for instance, or even Soundcore's own AeroFit 2 that we saw recently also has a larger hook that attaches onto the outside of the ear, versus a design like these clip on in an even more non-assuming way. So this spawned kind of an outbreak of many alternatives that suddenly started popping up over the course of the past few months. Almost all the larger players, in fact, including even Huawei, have come out with their own clip-on buds as an alternative, which are much more cost-effective. For instance, the Bose selling at $300, you're definitely paying a hefty price for that brand, as well as having that first original design, compared to the Soundcore C30i, which are the predecessors, sell for under $70. So it's more than 3 times cheaper, coming in 2 colors, including a white, that I've actually been using for the last couple of months, in addition to a kind of transparent black version, which is also quite cool because you can see through the plastic and see all of the components. And so fast forward a couple of months, and now Soundcore is back with the C40i, a slightly reamped or upgraded model, but it's more of a modest incremental bump when it comes to features and design compared to some of their other offerings in the Liberty line, as well as the AeroFit 2s that we also reviewed quite recently. I thought was a more significant bump compared to the first generation AeroFits. In fact, from the jump, it's actually kind of hard to differentiate these two apart, this being the first generation C30i's, these being the C40i's. Almost the same in terms of dimensions with the battery case. The newer model just has a slightly larger LED light strip there as an indicator, and then we still have the same, again, clip-on design with overall pretty much identical dimensions as well. Really the biggest difference though is slightly improved ergonomics, being that they now have flexible joints. Compared to on the original C30i's, they were a rigid piece of plastic that you couldn't really bend, feeling a little bit more stiff and potentially slightly less comfortable compared to on the newer generation. Again, it's a bit more malleable with the hinge crafted out of silicone, so it's a little easier to pop on and pop off now. And one other difference being that the C30i relied on capacitive sensor, which was touch sensitive. Perhaps it was a little easy to accidentally trigger if you're not too careful, compared to the new model actually uses a physical button now, which gives you a bit more of a tactile sensation when you're clicking down. So hardware-wise, you get some of those subtle improvements, even though from afar they actually still look very similar. And in terms of sound quality, I guess that's also one area where, surprisingly, there has been a pretty noticeable bump that we'll touch on more later in this video. But after wearing them side by side in a comparison, I would say if the C30i's were rated around 7 out of 10 when it comes to overall sound quality, the 40i's are now easily an 8.5, if not a little higher, out of 10. So there is noticeable improvement in clarity as well as more significant bass, considering that the size hasn't really changed, and also the speakers or driver size also hasn't really changed. They're still described as 12 millimeters by 17 millimeters, and that's the same sizing that was found on the previous C30i, as you can tell there. So somehow, even though it's not larger in terms of the speaker, you are getting more volume output, more satisfying bass, as well as clarity. It might be due to a new type of material for the diaphragm, as well as slightly better tuning. But it means if you are after better audio quality, I would definitely recommend the newer 40i's over the 30i's. That said, if you're a content current owner of the 30i's, it may not be necessarily enough to upgrade just yet, because those are pretty much all of the differences. Slightly better sound, as well as better ergonomic and fit. There are no additional new features per se. So for instance, the C40i's are still lacking high-res audio certification, or wireless I should say, including support for LDAC, that we did see from the jump between AeroFit 1 and AeroFit 2 that felt a little bit more significant. Plus, the AeroFit 2s also added in support for wireless charging in the battery case. Both of those features are still missing on the C40i, which is worth noting because these retail now at the same cost as the aforementioned AeroFit 2s. So I do think that if we're being completely honest, the hardware value of the AeroFit 2s might just be a little bit stronger. Kind of ironic that their biggest competition is within their own product that also recently launched, since both the AeroFit line as well as the C30, C40 are designed as open-sounding wearables. I would put them into the same category as something like bone conduction as well, or air conduction, since the speakers or drivers are technically resting just outside of the ear canals as opposed to being inserted all the way in, like on traditional silicone-style tips that will provide a bit more of a tight seal and noise isolation. So just like on the AeroFits, these are going to be good for giving you some ambient awareness. If you're in a city and walking around, you can be aware of cars approaching, for instance, or if you're in an office, you can still have a conversation without removing the buds. However, it also means that you're not going to get active noise cancellation compared to some of their Liberty line that relies on, again, more of that conventional style that fits all the way in. So in summary, the Liberty line are still better for commuting if you're traveling by car, train, or flying and trying to block out some of the engine noises, whereas the AeroFit as well as the C30, C40s are better if you're trying to have that awareness, providing better comfort for longer continuous listening sessions, perhaps for sports and exercise outdoors. So they're catered for slightly different purposes. And the difference between the clip-on versus more of that conventional bone conduction, air conduction style is just even more compactness, as well as arguably a more stylish design. But the thing about fashion is it's subjective. It's a matter of if you're okay with something slightly larger compared to a more novel, slightly newer design, clipping onto the side here compared to resting all the way here onto the back, resulting in even more portability and Soundcore having to miniaturize the components inside even more, but you are paying a bit more of a premium for that, again, subjectively more stylish approach. So some other features that you get here include multi-point connectivity, so you are able to pair with two devices simultaneously like most of their other offerings. That can be both a phone as well as a computer, and you can switch pretty easily back and forth between whatever device is playing back audio. It still supports the Soundcore companion app for customizing what the controls will correlate to, and also EQs that we'll see more later on in this video. And as far as battery life and endurance is concerned, it's not bad for, again, smaller, lightweight buds, although I will say that technically it has been slightly reduced compared to the C30i's, which could last for 10 hours of continuous listening, up to 30 hours with the case, compared to now 7 hours continuously and up to 21 hours with the case. So I'm assuming that those new drivers are just draining a little bit more power to get louder and slightly more rich, satisfying audio. It is a slight compromise. Water resistance rating, though, is still the same at IPX4, so it will withstand rain as well as sweat when you're exercising. And again, they are still extremely lightweight, very minimal when it comes to a fit as well as wearing perspective. If someone doesn't really look too closely, they can mistakenly think you have some type of ear piercing or earring of some sort. And inside of the packaging, aside from the actual C40i's, you'll also find access to a quick start guide as well as a USB Type-C charging cable and a few other spare kind of sleeves that you can attach onto the buds to provide an even more snug fit if you find them to be a little too loose. Again, comfort and fit perhaps being one of the largest selling points with a design like these if you want to be as lightweight as possible. And here's a final size comparison. It's a matte plastic now compared to glossy for the white version, and almost identical dimensions overall with a reset button there on the back and also Type-C for charging. That being said, the darker colorway here no longer comes in that translucent or transparent variant, allowing you to see the drivers and components inside. It's now completely opaque, as you can tell, for better or for worse. And also, compared to their kind of Liberty 4NCs, I would say the size isn't too far apart, maybe even a touch more compact, which is impressive for open-style buds. And also, the aforementioned AeroFit 2s are going to be significantly wider in order to accommodate those larger style kind of wings that have to fit onto the outside as you're wearing them. Really doesn't apply too much pressure, and you can kind of forget that they're on when you start listening to music. This side, by the way, is on the front. It's also where the speakers or drivers are located in this entire chamber, and subsequently the battery as well as the buttons are located on the back. So it's kind of shielded from view because the front part, again with the speaker mesh, has to be facing towards your ear canal in order for the sound to actually pass through. Here they are against the AeroFit 2s, which are a little bit longer and bean-shaped, I suppose. Also not really having a silicone style tip, just resting outside of the ear canal for less pressure. And the front of this one here is touch sensitive instead versus, again, the hardware-based physical key on the C40i. So despite having a good fit, the size here really is quite small and compact. So if we had to make a direct comparison with the C30i's, I would say the comfort on these are already good. Again, maybe close to 7 out of 10, but these are also, just like sound, a little bit closer to 8.5, if not 9 out of 10 now, thanks to these softer materials. Quick look at the Soundcore app. There's a tutorial that tells you how to properly wear the buds when you first connect them with your phone. And in here we can check out the battery status, as well as go into the EQ controls. The classic Soundcore signature I honestly think already sounds very good, but there's a further bass boosted mode, and there's even an amplifier mode, so if the sound is too low on certain recordings, you can bump up the entire volume. Furthermore, there is something called 3D surround sound, but similar to what we talked about on the AeroFits, this is just a EQ profile that's trying to simulate something like the speakers in a movie theater, as opposed to actually giving you dynamic head tracking, since there isn't accelerometers built on in. So as you're tilting your head around, the audio isn't going to be spatial and actually moving, but can still be neat to play around with if you're listening to certain live recordings or watching certain movies. Under custom EQ, we can also change the frequency sliders yourself, as well as assign different labels, giving you some additional granularity. However, there is no kind of sound ID inspired hearing test mode on here. Granted, that was likewise missing with the AeroFits, but compared to some of their more expensive Liberty series buds, for instance, it will play back a series of sounds, and you can press if you prefer sound 1 or 2 to create your tailor-made EQ automatically, which would have been nice to see as a software extra. Right now, everything here is still a little bit more manual, but at least provides a couple of those controls. You can find the dual connectivity option, pairing with 2 devices simultaneously, and it looks like it's actually saved in the memory of the buds, so it's able to reference past devices that I connected it with. We've also got the aforementioned remappable controls, so you can trigger a single, double, as well as long hold to trigger different commands, such as raising the volume higher or lower, skipping tracks, accessing the voice assistant, so on and so forth. You're able to customize based on your preferences on both the left and the right sides. And when a call is incoming, you can also press once to answer and double tap to decline the call, although these 2 controls seem to not be remappable. And like most other current gen Soundcore products, you don't really get any voice prompts for things like power or whatnot. There are a couple of chimes, kind of like a ringtone almost, if there is low battery or if it's turned off, but you can also turn those chimes on or off here as well, and that is more or less it. From the main menu of the Soundcore app, however, we can still find access to features including some white noise sound effects. Of course, this isn't exclusive to only the C40i's, but still nice to find if you're trying to relax or wind down. You can actually find some nature sounds now to help you calm down, as some additional soundscapes, with some additional categories that you can find here on the very top, labeled for various sounds. So relatively simple and straightforward. And again, this particular pair does not support LDAC or aptX, so it is relying on standard Bluetooth, SPC, and AAC when transmitting audio wirelessly, and although on paper having those higher res codecs can be helpful, it is important to remember that you get the full benefit as an Android user, but iPhones actually don't support the LDAC codec, for instance, so even on devices such as the AeroFit 2s, which do have that built in, you're still technically listening to it using regular SPC or AAC. Granted, it's not exactly an excuse to not have it, but just keep in mind that if you are an iPhone or iOS user, it may not be a feature that you'll be able to leverage even on pairs that support it, but for Android users, it might be something a little more significant. Granted, the audio quality is actually still very good on the C40i's, as in the transmission quality was quite stable, so I wasn't really able to hear any static, hissing, or distortion in the background. It sounded loud and clear, never really got disconnected from my device, and for lack of a better word, it just sounds like it was recorded in higher quality almost. Pretty much all aspects, including the bass, mids, as well as trebles, just sound more lively on the C40i's, which is, again, quite impressive considering that the driver size remains the same. Now, to be clear, I wouldn't say that these are necessarily the most impactful or extremely bass-heavy pair of buds, even if you flick on the bass-boosted mode using the EQ, but that is mostly a limitation of the style of kind of air conduction or open-sounding pair of buds are typically all affected by this because, again, the speakers or drivers don't really push all the way in, and seal is quite important when it comes to bass, giving you those higher vibrations. However, it's still a noticeable increase compared to, again, the C30i's, and also versus the AeroFit 2s, I would say they're mostly on par, and I certainly found them to be pronounced enough for the music to be enjoyable, still providing a decent kick whenever a drum beat played in a song, for instance, for me to be sucked into the music, bringing it to life without overpowering the mids or the trebles, which again were also very good without sounding too shrill or thin, even on higher frequency sounds, including vocals. So all in all, resulting in a pretty enjoyable listening experience that I was able to just get immersed in almost immediately once the sound kicked in. Didn't really notice any latency issues either when it comes to even consuming some YouTube or Netflix shows with them, and also, despite having a kind of open design, I wouldn't say the sound leakage is that bad either. Someone sitting next to you, if you're playing back volume at around 30-40% on a subway or train, actually isn't really able to hear what you are listening to. Granted, if you're in a completely quiet space and cranking the volume up to 100, then perhaps yes, there's still going to be a little bit that leaks out, but all in all, it isn't bad, particularly if you're around the city, where there's some ambient noise and sound pollution happening anyways. It's a little bit better than expected. So that is more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Soundcore by Anker C40i clip-on style open buds, and all in all, again, this time around they just have slightly improved ergonomics and giving you some of that awareness of what's going on around you, kind of like an always-on transparency mode, while remaining pretty snug. So if you're jogging, moving around, going to the gym, they will still stay in place quite nicely. Performance was also pretty consistent and stable from a pairing point of view, with tuning of the drivers now being a notch or two higher compared to the C30i. That being said, perhaps the biggest question here is whether or not some of those compromises, such as again not having the official aptX or LDAC support, no wireless charging for the battery case, can still warrant a price point here at around $100. Because as we've touched on at the start of this video, I honestly think on a hardware level, spec per spec, arguably the AeroFit 2s might be a better value, since it does have those features, a similar open sound for a equivalent price point. That being said, again, if you do like these in terms of their ultra compactness, you like the way that they look, overall the sound quality now at least isn't really anything to complain about. Really, it's as consistent and nice sounding as most of the other current generation products from Soundcore, despite a smaller form factor and open design. Not bad, all things considered. You can check out more details if you are interested, no links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That has been the Soundcore C40i clip-on style wireless buds.